And welcome back. I guess this is part two of Interview with Wizards. I'm kidding. Goedemorgen for those of you that are from the Netherlands, or Goedenavond, depending. I'm pretty sure that, like, hola, ¿cómo están? See if you guys are from any Spanish speaking countries, or if you're from the United States or any English speaking countries. What up? What's good? We'll just go ahead and just jump into it. So we'll start off with something. What is your favorite bar memory that you've had? Like, interacting with one another, whether it's us dancing or something like that. Feel free to
It
share.
probably has to be us dancing. Like, probably, we would sometimes go to this like Latin club,
Oh no.
and like it's one of the only clubs that had like a dance floor or dance area, and like, no offense to Dutch people, but you guys don't know how to dance, and I know they try, and I really appreciate that. But they have a certain style of dancing that is somewhat like, it's just very static. Yeah, it's like, kind of standing and fist bumping, and like, as long as you're enjoying it, that's a lot of fun. But like, we see that sometimes. We're like, I feel like we have to liven this place up. So like, me and Edgar would just go over and do like salsa or something, like just something a little more energetic, or using the space a little more, I would say. And kind of what I always enjoyed about that is that it gave people, I think, who are maybe a little shy, like a little more courage to kind of let themselves loosen up and just move around more, even if they look silly. Like, you don't have to be a good dancer to like be more energetic.
Right.
And of course, like, I have some dancing training, you have some dancing training, so like, I don't think we never coordinated anything. I think we just understood very well at the start that like we're going to dance well together, and we just always have. So
That is very true, actually. I don't think we've ever spoken about, like, oh, like, this is like our move set, like, like a Mortal Kombat character. This is how we can, like, max our combos. No, we just did it so well, like, twirls, dancing, and everything. Yeah. Like, we got the attention of everyone.
Yeah. I'm not a masterful dancer or something, but I'm comfortable dancing, and especially with Edgar, who's a great dance partner.
Oh, thank you very much. Have you ever? Okay, follow-up question: have you ever used your psychology to pick up people? Shut the fuck up, Brady.
It's really more for you than me.
I'm pretty sure you continuing off of that story, Brady. Because I guess I can read people pretty well when it comes to, like, motivations, what they want to hear, what they want to know, so on.
I only use my wizard powers for good, never for personal gain.
What is good? What is the gray area?
Yeah, I'll guess the gray area. Yes,
we'll get into the gray area in a bit, but when it comes to, like, going out, like, dancing or whatever, right? Like, a lot of times, like, you've been there with me, it would take less than 2 minutes before, like, you could really engage someone in a conversation, and they'd be divulging everything about their life.
That is true. Now that's true. Like, sometimes we would go out and just kind of like we would have fun and just see if we could get people talking, like, because there's a certain line of questioning you use as a psychologist that it's not the normal kind of dialogue you have with people. Mm-hmm. It's more open-ended questions. It's very impartial language, and it's language that's designed to get people to talk to you and for them to feel that you are engaged in what they're saying. Obviously, because the client wants the therapist to feel like they're engaged. So outside of a therapy environment, this also serves the same purpose. It's like it gets them talking, but it also makes them feel like you're very engaged, and likely that you are. And so there have been times where I see Edgar making a play, and my role as the sort of wingman for him at times has been to ask these sort of like psych oriented questions, just to kind of let the conversation open up, and then I'll depart.
To be fair, though, for those of you that are like, oh, you're using your psych for your advantage, as someone, no, like, as someone that's just like I guess, people talker, because, like, I could really, like, almost all the bartenders pretty much knew me at that point in terms of, like, being able to have, like, a really open conversation with them, making them feel friendly and comfortable. I think this is extremely important. Like, it's not being weird about it. It's just being open and comfortable with them. And strong enough that I think I impressed Brady with my techniques to read people, because it took a total of like 30 seconds to go ahead and like
sometimes we'd be like on the way out of somewhere, and he'd be like, hold on, I'm gonna go get someone's number in the next 30 seconds before we leave, and we could go and do that. But yeah, I should say, like, this is never it's not using the psych stuff in a manipulative way. It's just that it's a very unique way of speaking to someone that most people are not expecting out in a sort of night out environment. So it's interesting to them. Like, it's just it's something that you don't hear a lot, and maybe you're caught off guard by. And so, but I would say that it's not just like picking people up. I also do that just to talk
everyday
to
people.
anyone.
It's a good talking technique. Like,
like when I talk to my family, I also use that kind of open-ended questioning, because it moves the discussion in a way that is like different from the kind of generic discussion you might have at the dinner table or something. It's a more explorative and a more idea challenging kind of discussion, and so that it broadens the range of topics and the kinds of things you can talk about. And yes, on a night out, it can lead to some very entertaining things.
Especially walking down the streets of The Hague at like 3 a.m, trying to find the train back to Leiden. Those are some of the best memories you'll ever have. It's like being so
just talking to random people.
Yeah, just talking to random people. Do you think that there are people who are inherently good and evil? Have you ever met one of them? Don't say me.
No, you're not. Do I think that people are inherently good or evil? Well, I'm gonna say no. I don't think that my framework isn't necessarily about like narrative therapy is all about the working with the definitions of things. What is the meaning of the story you're experiencing?
Right.
How does the language you're using to tell that story inform what you're thinking about it? And so it's going to be different every time. Would I make a judgment and say that person is evil? Probably not. If I'm working with someone who says, my boss is evil, for them, their definition of evil is something they've assigned to this person. And so I have to work with their definition of it.
Right.
It's not about whether I think that person is evil. Narrative is a lot about, what we use the language that you use, which defines your experience, and we kind of we try to change those definitions, or we try to use them to understand things in a better way. But no, I don't necessarily obviously there are exceptions. I mean, there's like really awful historical figures who you're just like, yeah, that person's really evil.
Or people, some people that pass the line.
Yeah, I mean, it's just about how you define that word and whether you can apply it to someone's entire life. Was Hitler evil as an infant just because he was evil later in life? You have to narrow the context that, yes, in his adult life he was evil.
I think,
but, like, are people evil? I don't think I don't think you can assign the entire lifespan to
of a
that. I don't know. It's a tricky subject. Like I said, it's more about the definition of the word than whether I think it's possible to
right.
embody.
Well, like me jumping just straight into that, like if we're gonna have that clear defined barrier of good and evil, I'm just gonna go ahead and erase that, right? Because there are people that are not gonna fit into either category that just go straight in the middle. I think that honestly, and this is something me and Brady have talked about before. There's a gray spectrum, right? It really is just one giant gray moving spectrum in which, yeah, there might be lighter shades of gray, but there's also dark ass shades of gray in there as well, right? And I think just having, if we categorize people as good and evil, and like we work with this mentality, like it's going to take a lot more for this person to move from bad to good, right? Where if you all of a sudden you start seeing stuff as like a spectrum, a gray spectrum, it's like, okay, it's getting a little bit lighter, it's not like it's completely like, a dark gray to like a light gray. It's not like it's completely light gray or almost white. Like there's somewhere in the middle, right? So you can start move. It's easier to work people if you have a more defined, like not defined, but like a broader spectrum to work with, right? Because all of a sudden, like the ideology of good and evil is no longer like this person is evil because of this. It's like, okay, they might have been evil during this period of time, but they've also been working to improve themselves, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think that's also worth saying is like when you say good and evil, these are at such ends of the extreme that like there's probably only been a handful of truly evil people, like I said, historical figures who we know are evil.
Right.
In the context of like psychologically, when you're talking about evil, it's such an extreme that only a handful of people really embody that rotten to the core, their whole life just shouldn't have happened kind of evil. That in the context we're working with, and unless you really just have someone who is, I don't know, if you're dealing with a serial killer who has no remorse or something, then I guess you've got someone who's evil. It's not something I've encountered personally in my work
Right.
as a psychologist. So it's hard for me to really say because I don't have firsthand experience with true evil. I can only talk about it conceptually, and in that sense, it's hard for me to make a judgment about.
So, what do you love and hate most about humanity, humans or humanity?
Um, I well, I think that the ability to tell a story is uniquely human. Um, not unique in the way that like no other species could ever do that. I just
Right.
mean that the way humans tell a story would be completely different if lions were sentient and they were telling a story. It wouldn't be a human story; it would be a lion story, right? So, what I love about uniquely human stories is the way you know we look for things like meaning in them, and like I was talking about different kinds of character conflicts and these sorts of things. We can get very deep with how to tell a story. So I think the creative art of telling a story that is uniquely human is something I love about humanity.
What I love about humanity is the fact that we're willing to change, right? As individuals. Sometimes we may be stubborn as heck, but due to the times, right? In some way, shape, or form, we're changed. And this is something I bring up a lot during like the anime reactions and whatnot, especially the video games, where I talk about how in one moment you can be viewed as a villain, right? Like as a completely evil person because of a situation that happened. 10 years down the road, all of a sudden, because time, situation, social settings change, you're no longer viewed as a villain, and you could be viewed as somewhere in the gray area to even a hero. And I think it's this change of experiences and this change of a pendulum that swings from one side to another that makes humans so human. Because we have that ability to change, we have the ability to either improve or completely, just become a horrible individual if we want to. And it's having the ability to make those choices that I think makes us, it's our greatest gift, but also one of our greatest downfalls. So, yeah. What do you hate about humanity, though?
I guess something I really dislike about humanity, or I guess you could say I hate it, is um, that we can willingly uh, do things we know are not good. You know, because I would have a lot more sympathy for people who do things that are not good because of a psychological complex or because of their, socio-cultural situation. When you can trace the influence of someone's behavior in a way that makes you understand it, you know, then you can simultaneously not condone the things that they do, but give a context to it. And what I hate is that sometimes you don't need that because people also very willingly do things that are malicious or evil
Right.
in a sense. And there's no sociocultural or there's no traceable explanation that that allows you to contextualize it in a way. They just are willing to do it. And so I hate that we have the capacity to do that.
So what I hate about humanity in general is our capacity to like our judgments, right? Is a majority of the like societies in general are too quick to judge. And we built like a lot of stigmas around people being able to express themselves, mental health, so on and so forth, because of these like predisposed judgments that we've had. And I think if we were good to go ahead and like come from a place of understanding more so than a place of judgment, humanity would probably be in a better place. Uh, and that's just a sad reality, and that's something that even as we progress, probably society is either going to get judgier in some aspects because we're either trying to be so inclusive or exclusive that we start like including or excluding certain people, and that's still judging in one way or another. So it's about trying to go ahead and like build humans to try and be more understanding and caring for one another without excluding everyone. So,
Yeah. And I guess
well,
that's exactly what I mean in going with judgments and building off of what I was saying. It's like, you know, when you have something like racism, and it's like in the modern day, the tools for people to not be racist are plentiful. You know, there are so many ways you can inform yourself and develop your understanding of the subject. But the fact that so many people still willingly reject those tools is what I find really upsetting, because there's no excuse anymore. You
right.
know, the tools are available for you if you're willing to approach them. You know, there should be no lack of understanding unless you choose not to, and that's where I like agree with you about. You know, we head in this direction of judgment where it's like you should really you have the resources not, to be racist or transphobic or whatever else, and that there's so many people who are willingly ignoring those resources or willing to not inform themselves because they want to keep that ideology.
So, like, and just jumping in with an example, right? I think because life is ever evolving, right? So, something that I think a lot of people, for example, like, at least where I'm at the moment, they have a lot of issues with is like pronouns. For whatever reasons, other therapists and stuff that I work with, they have issues with like the they, them pronouns or whatever, right? And my whole thing is like it's literally a word that like to them it gives them so much meaning, right? Because like meaning there being a he or a she and they them, if it gives them that much meaning to them, like why are you as a therapist or are you as a mental health professional, especially the older mental health professionals, so resistant to try and go ahead and adjust and be empathetic as they should be? But that's
Well,
also
that's exactly what I mean. Like, there's no reason why you should still grapple with a subject like this. Like, the resources are plentiful to understand why this is a simple change that you can make. And I don't actually know any therapists personally who like refuse to upgrade their ideas
Vocabulary.
about
Yeah.
this. It's depressing to know that there still are out there. I guess older therapists probably more what you're talking about. But like I said, yeah, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to understand this at this point,
Right.
and it's just kind of depressing that they just you are choosing to like not update your
Right.
understanding of something. This
So
like
we
this willful ignorance.
so we got a troll question, and you won't understand this, but I will. And it's who's Rem? I know you don't understand that, but when you watch the anime, I'm sure you will. And then you're gonna be like, "Fuck you
Mm.
guys!"
Well,
Literally,
Rem
my
is also a character in Death Note,
oh, that's right, that's right. It is a character in Death
the
Note.
female Shinigami.
Shinigami, yeah. Well, not that Rem. We'll put it that way. Not that Rem. Trust me. What is something you'd like to tell your past self?
Huh. How past are we talking? Like, because I got
Like
shit to say to myself from a week ago that's probably valuable.
whichever or however, wherever you want to take the story.
I don't know. Um, I uh, it's hard to say. Like, I've I am less concerned with telling my past self things as I am now, and more what I hope my future self tells me right now. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
If I have to choose where to take a snapshot from, I don't think current Brady has much to say to past Brady that is going to directly impact his life. But what I'm trying to do is access what my future self would probably tell myself right now.
See, I think I can go onto my past self because I feel like I lost a good period of time after, I guess, you know this story about like the really, really bad breakup that I had. And yeah, I opened up to some people in the server itself. I would just essentially tell myself to like, keep my head up, number one, because I feel like that was something that ended up happening is I lost a lot of self-esteem, started getting a little bit of body dysmorphia thing. I started getting a little bit of anxiety, just shutting myself down from all social settings. And number two, focus on what I want to do and what I want to love. Because I ended up like retreating off from theater, doing so many things that like essentially instead of the thing that they were helping me, they were like support foundations that I had up. I was just
Yeah.
like cutting ties with everything because I felt like I needed to come in instead of like being around supportive individuals, supportive community. So that's the advice that I would give myself and just be like, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna meet some amazing individuals. You're gonna go dancing in the Hague. It's all gonna be good. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So next question for you, and this might be a easy one for you. What's the worst show, book, or series you've ever read or seen?
Oh, you can't ask me that. Like I was saying before, I had a whole podcast dedicated to talking about the worst things ever written. So objectively, probably something in that, but a little more relatable would probably be, you know, um, something that everyone is familiar with. What's the worst book, television, or movie I've ever seen? Like I said, relatively,
Uh huh.
obviously, I've read things that like you wouldn't believe how awful they are, and like I'm not joking. Like I've probably read objectively the worst things, unreadable, and I don't mean like subjectively. I mean like you physically cannot read through it because it is like missing words and these sorts of things, and still being published.
On Amazon, yeah.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, like, but more relatable, more relative. What's the worst? What's pissed me off more than anything else? Ah, this is a tough one.
I mean,
What's your answer?
that's sort of what I'm thinking. It's like, what what form of media has pissed me off the most, right? Um, I can't really put my finger on it, only because I'm like, there's a lot that I'm aggravated by that I'm like, mm, what is it? There was a couple bad books. One that like I heard you go into when you were doing your podcast, right? So I thought that like your first episode, China Strike, right, was already going to be like bad enough, but you just kept going downhill from there. So that's
Yeah,
already like a hole and a half. And I thought that that was already like, okay, we're starting at like a 2 in badness, and I was wrong. We were starting at like a 10 in goodness and going down into a descent to
exactly.
hell. So there's
I
so
would,
much.
yeah, I would say that like the way I would quantify what marks me as something truly awful is if it's a book, unless I was reading them for a show, so of course I was reading them to the end. But a book is a long investment. It's not like a half an hour thing. So if it's truly awful, you won't usually finish it. You'll just throw it out, right?
Mhm.
So the things that have pissed me off more than anything else have been things I was invested in that I thought had a high quality mark and then failed to deliver on. You
Right.
know, obviously, a lot of people more recently were very upset with the end of Game of Thrones because they felt like they invested a lot of time into the first 6 seasons or so, and that the last two dropped the ball in every department. So you can say, oh, that's the worst thing ever because you had a high mark towards it. In that sense, one of the things that pissed me off more than anything was the end of System Shock 2. This is a System Shock 2 is a super old game. It's like 1999,
Yeah.
and it has like some of the best like atmospheric sci-fi horror writing. It's really clever. It's like novel esque in its writing and characterization, and then the ending is truly awful because they ran out of time to do it, and so like I don't know the exact story, but it's like someone like intern or something at the studio just like slapped it together
Ooh.
and they put it on the disc, and so like it completely mismatches the tone and quality of everything else, and so like it always sticks out to me as like one of the worst endings to anything, only because everything else was so excellent.
Right.
It takes a 9 out of 10 game and makes it a 1 out of 10
Right.
just because of the ending. So that like I'm not saying that's the worst thing ever, but it's the reference I'm using to say that probably the worst things that I've experienced, I didn't finish them. I wouldn't finish reading a book if it was terrible.
Right.
And so like it's usually about the ending. If the ending is truly awful, then it recontextualizes everything else as being awful.
I guess for a series, now that I'm thinking about it, it's not so much a series, but it's like the genre of the series, right? And as much as I hate that I'm watching it, right? Not really hate that because I love the show. Don't get me wrong, but it's like if it follows the stereotypical routine, right? Which is you've been isekai'd, or like you've been pulled into another world, and you are super powerful, and you are building a harem, and
That show that you're watching?
no. This show you got to watch this show. This show is like it'll mess you up. Like that's the best way to put it. You're probably gonna be like, "What the fuck, Edgar? What am I watching?" Because that was me. Like every episode, what the fuck? What am I watching? In a good way. But like the other shows, right? It hurts so good. That's the best way I can put it. The other shows, right, which is like a stereotypical like building a harem, like having OP superpowers. There's like no like villain knocks him down and then he gets back up and he's able to like the stereotypical plot in that for me is like shit that I hate
Yeah.
because there's no advancement in character progression or whatnot. The one that we're currently watching or that a lot of these like people really love is like called ReZero, and it is a dark psychological anime, if I do say so myself. Uh,
I guess I have to watch this now. Like,
to understand some of the memes on Discord, yeah, I think you might have to. Uh, it's yeah, it's something. That's the best way I can put it. And see if I was about to say if you analyze the characters as you go through, you might find yourself being called a wizard. Apparently, so watch yourself for that. Okay. Next one is Um, what character from all of media do you relate to the most?
Hmm. From all of media.
The machine from Person of Interest.
Well,
I'm
probably
kidding.
not the machine, but plenty of stuff in person of interest. Yeah, not because I shared a similar life path, but because that show is a lot about finding purpose in your life that I resonated with, but wouldn't necessarily say I connected with it on such a personal level. I would say that if any of you out there have played Near Automata or have heard of it, that is probably one of the pieces of media that resonated more personally with me than anything else
Right.
ever. And I can't say anything about why, uh, because it is truly something you have to experience. But maybe not any particular character, but the experience of playing that game and the overall conclusion, I think, was my most meaningful engagement with a piece of media that is strictly entertainment, but has given my life more value as a result.
See, I feel like for me, it's a pretty simple answer, and it's like the Metal Gear Solid series. Uh, I used to play the games. This is sort of where I got my tinfoil hat stuff from, right?
Psychopath has traumatized you, and now
Yeah, Kojima traumatized me, and like ever since then,
you
right?
like
Because it's
Castlevania, don't you?
because in 2002, right? Like this is like before the era of memes. Uh, Kojima does this huge speech about like memes being the future and how like we'll be able to communicate feelings, thoughts, emotions, and even if we die, like if we're memed, like it'll like live on. And now we're in 2021, and that's literally how 90% of us
Yeah.
communicate is through fucking memes. And I'm over here like he was right all along. He makes a game about a delivery man in a pandemic. What happens that same year? A pandemic, and the delivery men were our saviors. So Kojima, you know, he has my interest in terms of like being analyzed as an individual. Because yeah, but yeah, the Metal Gear Solid series just hit on so many points in terms of death, living, so on and so forth. That just really, I don't know,
Yeah.
puts me to try and understand human behavior a little bit further.
Yeah. No, I would say it's a hard question because I don't. It's not like there's a character I so closely relate to in terms of literally what they've experienced is what I've experienced. In my own writing, I write characters that have things that parallel my own struggles.
Right.
Um, but there are characters who I have resonated a lot with, like Jonas Kanwald from the show Dark, the
Uh huh.
German show. I have never, been in a weird, fucked up like time travel dystopia like he has, but I resonate strongly with the futility of feeling like you can't control things in your life, and despite how much the world tries to break you, you know find a way to carry on, and these sorts of things. Those are things that resonated strongly with me from a character point of view. Um, but that's why I say more towards like as an overall experience, not necessarily character related. Near Automata was the most like meaningful.
So here's another good question. I'd like to learn more about disassociation, depersonalization, or derealization. Do you have any techniques on how to deal with it? And there's more to that question, but we'll start with just that little bit. Do you have any tips on how to deal with anyone that disassociates or depersonalizes?
Yeah. Well, obviously, there's like classical grounding techniques. This is like at two levels. One is how do you cope with the symptoms of dissociation? Like how do you ground yourself and prevent this dissociation? Then there's the second layer of that is how do you contextualize the fact that this is something you experience? What does it mean to you that you can dissociate, and how do you integrate that into your idea of your identity and these sorts of things? So there's one is just treating the symptoms, the other is how do you, like, what meaning does this have in your life? It's probably something I would have to talk with someone. It's hard to generalize something like that, and I don't want to give like advice like generally when I don't know the situation.
See, what I would do is like just in terms of like something generic that you can do that, like if you do go to a therapist, that would really help. Is keep track of whenever you disassociate. And I know it's going to be hard because you're disassociating, but when you come back, right, write down the time that you came back and, whatever that may be, or the time that you came back into your body that you've grounded yourself. Keeping a log of that is actually really good because then you're able to go ahead and be like, all right, you know what? I disassociated for 20 minutes on my drive home. Because driving home is the most common place, or doing something that's just mind numbing where people disassociate, right?
Yeah.
And just being able to keep certain tracks of it, you might start finding patterns. Not just that, it's really helpful for a therapist, if you do go to a therapist, to show them this logs that you've been writing and be like, look, these are this is my journal that I've been keeping my own logs with. These are my disassociation times, and this is sort of what was happening when I disassociated. And you'll be able to find links and whatnot, and maybe go over grounding techniques that are best help you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So part 2 on that question is, how do you also deal with gaslighting, codependency, or essentially we'll go with that. How do you deal with someone that's gaslighting and someone that's being extremely codependent?
So before I answer that, I do have something to add to the dissociation subject.
Sure.
This is a simple technique that's really great for either mindfulness or grounding purposes. And not even necessarily for dissociation, but just if you feel like you struggle with overwhelming thoughts. One very simple technique is to start narrating what you're thinking. And what this does is it gives a natural filter to your mind. Because in your mind, your thoughts can go in an infinite amount of directions. They can be non-linear. You can start associating or dissociating things that don't actually have a connection. You can assign anxiety to an event that you're thinking about and start worrying about your self-esteem. And like your mind is just this infinite web of connections. When you start talking, you have to naturally limit yourself because of the structure of language. When you talk, you have to put one idea in front of the other, and you have to make sense of something in a much more simplified way than what your mind can do. So when you're trying to ground yourself, literally just start narrating your thoughts in a kind of like just free form way, because it's like putting a funnel down. All the thoughts you're having will just they'll have to narrow down because you're talking, and language is restricted in that way.
Right.
And so it helps a lot with overthinking and also grounding. Just narrate whatever you're thinking about. That's one of my favorite techniques.
So I guess we'll skip the codependency one because I just saw one that's a little bit more like on the real. Like the codependency is a real question. I'm not going to invalidate it, but like the second part, or like another part of this big list here, is like, how do you cope when someone is using suicide or self-harm as a means of emotional control over you, and how do you help the loved one who is actually suicidal or self-harming? So I guess
that's a big question.
Yeah, I guess I'll break it down, right? When it comes to someone that you like, you care about, you love, a friend, attachment, whatever it may be, that's actually suicidal, self-harming, the best thing that you can do is one, ask them how you can best be there for them, right? Because sometimes, like, if they're like, hey, you know what, I'm self-harming, but I hate, like, it makes me want to harm more if you're in my space, in my personal space, right? Occasional check-ins, people are more than willing to talk if you let them. Like, how can I best, like, I'm going to be checking up on you. You can even say, like, every couple of days, I'm going to be sending you a text, just like checking up on you, see how you're doing. But aside from that, how can I best help you, right? Because at the point in time where you're like, oh, you know what, they're having suicidal thoughts, suicidal tendencies, I'm going to go ahead and like be there every single minute of the day, you're pushing them into a state of uncomfortability. And what happens, like, when you push essentially any animal, human or whatever, into a corner, is they lash out. So it's just something that's completely natural, and you have to communicate. You have to be very open and caring, and come from a place of empathy and not a place of sympathy or judgment. So, very big difference.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, this it's a broader discussion than I think is really like able to get into, and also context matters obviously. But one thing that I think probably helps is not understanding that you shouldn't always use problem solving as a show of support.
Hmm.
Problem solving as a show of support is not always beneficial. And so, if you're trying to be there for someone who's in a very tough position, giving them solutions or giving them ideas about what they should do, even if that's what they're asking for, is often not how they actually, work on that issue. So I would frame this in a way of, it's less really about what I can suggest you say to them, but more how you conduct yourself to that person,
Right. And
which is to be understanding, to be caring, to be open to them and to their needs, but not to take on the role of someone who is, trying to make them do anything about it.
And with that being said, I think with all of these topics, especially like suicide or self harm, find your national hotline for suicide prevention. Be able to give them the resources and be able to go ahead and implement them. If anything, like, because sometimes it does, the individual doesn't have to be the one that makes the call. You can make the call and have them do a wellness check
Yeah.
as well on them. So,
It's definitely something I would add is that, therapy, this is why it's sort of an uncomfortable topic for me, because like therapy is not an emergency service.
yeah,
And that is an issue I've faced in my own practice, is that a lot of times people assume, here, I have this therapist and they help me with things, and oh, I just suddenly had a crisis, I have to call my therapist. And therapy is not an emergency service. And you crises such as, like, suicidal ideation, those are emergencies often.
great.
And so they're much more suited to someone who's well versed in crisis management or that sort of thing. The process of therapy, my skill set, is something that flourishes when the person is in a certain state of mind. They may not be balanced in all ways, otherwise they wouldn't be in therapy, but they need to be in a position where they are able to work on things and collaborate on things.
Right.
And suicidal ideation is at such an extreme that it falls more into emergency service, and that's just not the role of therapy.
And following up with that, if someone, and guess this is a really good way that we broke it down. If someone is using, like suicidal thoughts or suicidal ideation as a way to like manipulate you in any way, shape, or form, realize that one, you are not the therapist, you are not a crisis manager as like an individual. And the best thing that you can do is like give them the hotline, give them the resources that you find online. If they don't reach out to those resources or whatever, the best thing that you can do for yourself is literally like step away, because at that point, right, that manipulation is going to continue. You're more than likely always going to be in a circle of distrust and pain and all of this, and it sucks being in a state where all of a sudden someone that you care about is threatening to hurt themselves if you're not there at their every beck and call. And that's something that they need to work out by themselves through either therapy or through actually going through the hotlines for crisis management. So that's my whole ideology with that. Trying to find the questions again. Loop. Okay, we have a couple more. So I guess silly time, you know, what is like for you one of the stupidest memories that you're like, why did we do that during our time together, either studying or whatnot?
Hmm. Probably getting that fucking couch.
Mind explaining what happened?
Well, we lived in a dormitory,
Yeah,
right? For the first year of our masters.
I thought we could do
Um,
it.
And like you wanted a couch. And we already talked a little bit about like the layout of our town and stuff, and the general experience of living in a university town in Europe. Like, you don't have a car to go pick up a couch. You go on your feet and you pick it up with your hands. And so we walked all the way across town to go get this couch. And how far did we? It took us like an hour just to get it like past one block of street, and we had like 13 blocks to go or something.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. It was
So we had to call for help, basically, like a lot of help to get it home, and it still took us the whole day.
the whole night because it was nighttime by then. Like, let's be
Yeah.
real.
And I also
However,
have photos of that whole experience if people are curious.
however, I will say though, by the end of the night, we had like 20 something people, or like a lot of people helping us.
Yeah,
To the point,
it was like 5 or 6 people at least.
at least, yeah. But like, it ended up being so much to the point where like no one really needed to like put that much effort in. It was ridiculous. It turned into something a whole
We
fucking
went
show.
from struggling very hard to not struggling at all. But that's one of the experiences I shake my head at, that we tried for like 3 hours to like move it inches at a time.
We probably looked like homeless people because we would lay
Well,
down the couch, we
we
would
have
chill.
to couch down and then sit on it for a while to rest.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
the middle of
yeah.
the street. Just in the middle of the street. Like,
Cars passing by and everything. Yeah, I remember that. That was great.
so,
Uh,
that was funny.
one
We
of
had a
the
lot of silly, stupid shit that we did, I guess.
we did a lot of silly, stupid shit. No, I'm trying to think. I'm like, what is one of the stupidest things that like we did while we were there? Some stuff I can't talk about clearly. And I know you know which stuff I'm talking about, but like, some of the stupid shit that we did. I mean, we are party animals in a one way or another. So we were always like, up for going to go drinking or dancing, playing pool, all of that. Um, what is
Meeting very strange people.
Yes, yes, we did meet a lot of strange people. What is something really okay? Something silly, dorky that we did, right? When we got our new suits. We did a whole photography. It's not that I like don't like it. I loved it. Are you kidding me? Yeah, like let's go. So we got
Yeah,
brand new.
photo
We got,
shoot in the park.
yeah, we got brand new suits and we did a photo shoot in the park. That is silly, but in a good way. So
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
that was my wholesome silly moment. Okay, so what's required from an anxious attachment person to go from an anxious attachment to secure attachment? What'd
This
you say?
is all you. Like, attachment
Honest,
theory is not my domain.
Honestly, it's a spectrum as well, right? Like, yeah, our attachments are indicated from when we're born, our caregivers, all of that, right? But you can become healthier individuals through therapy, through all of that, and start forming foundations and attachments that lead us into that secure attachment. I guess one of those biggest things that you can see is like if an anxious attachment person, will try and like jump from one person to another person, right? Instead of like taking time, taking that break in between where it's like, let me take time to process what happened. Let me work on myself as an individual. Let me heal. Let me go ahead and like put up like make friendships that will literally like build me up to be a better person and then go from there. That's how you become a more secure attached person.
Yeah.
So that's just, super, super easy. And then how to avoidant person to secure one. That's the same thing, but like in the reverse side. So instead of like having no one or like, it's essentially the same thing, same process. You get a foundation of people that you like, you start trusting one by one, even if like you hate having them close, and then you start getting used to them and keep building off of that until you're in a secure space. It's like, it's a weird triangle. I think that's what
But
psychology
this
is.
is why this is why I find psychology interesting, because like attachment theory is its own world of understanding people and relationships and interactions that I'm not very familiar with. But I don't need to be at all to treat the same problem. Just in the way that if someone is, having a narrative crisis, you can apply attachment theory to that lens too. Like, neither of us need to be skilled or versed in the the specific doctrine to kind of work on that problem. But when you use the language of avoidant secure attachment, then it's much more suitable for someone who knows about that stuff to talk about it in those terms, because
Right.
it's not the language I would use to talk about it, but that's because my whole perspective on it is in a different doctrine of psychology altogether.
See, my whole thing is like if you're wanting to look into like specifics, like actual books and studies and whatnot, a couple great people that you can look into are Bowlby and Ainsworth, which are sort of like the fathers and mother of attachment theory. So that's just a really good like thing to look into through a historical lens. A last question is, who is the strongest wizard between you two? You know what? I think we complete each other in a lot of ways. Like all the holes that like I have, like you fill them up, and vice versa through like our knowledge gaps of wherever our strength lies. So
It does happen. Like I do call up Edgar and say like, hey, I'm dealing with someone who I think has issues with attachment, and like I'm interested in how you would approach this from an attachment theory perspective. And you also call me up and say, hey, I'm thinking about working with someone from a narrative perspective. How would you approach this? And so that is, that's the beauty of it. We have another friend, Omar, who he's also developing his skill set. He really likes somatic psychology. This is a lot about like where you feel things in your body. And we all have a different skill set, different set of techniques in these sorts of things. And that's the best thing about it, is that you don't need to be the expert in all fields. It's why you have supervision. It's why you have peers who study different things. So I think we do complete each other in our wizardry. Now, if we're talking about in raw strength, Edgar, you nearly broke my fucking ribs once.
Okay, dude. Okay. To be fair, we were sparring down in the little like student living center, student whatever.
I realize this is my fault, because this was around the same time that I was like, I want to get back into martial arts and let's do some sparring, because the dojo sucked, and we just like started fighting each other, and I got my ass
That pillar, if that pillar wasn't there, you would totally be fine.
kicked me into a pillar, like, and I think I had some rib damage. Like, I actually had trouble breathing for some time.
You had some like bruised ribs and shit.
Yeah. So Edgar is the stronger wizard in terms of raw strength.
But in terms of like, I'd say knowledge on like books and like being able to like dissect all that shit, bro, I don't stand a candle against you. If I'm gonna be real with you, like your amount of knowledge that goes into like, for example, Amazon publishing, the scandal with all that shit, like books, where you get into like the fucking like shitty books that get published and all that. Like, I don't have the capacity to go sit through and read some shitty ass writing and then be like, now it's time for me to go ahead and like analyze and dissect this shitty writing.
The time I uncovered a conspiracy of stolen AI written novels that were being sold on Amazon in mass volume. Yeah, that was interesting.
But anyway, let's bring, I guess, the recording to a close. So thank you guys so much for staying by. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope this answered your first ever Q&A, two-parter with two wizards, I'm guessing. Who knows? Maybe Brady will like next time stay through and like we'll do what his story is or whatever. So we'll go off of that. But Brady, anything you want to say? Anything you want to plug? Self-care advice, whatever. Feel free.
Nothing to plug so far. Like I said, still I'm shifting to a new project format. Podcast finished. Now I'm doing videography, but I'm still working on that. So nothing to plug just yet, but you'll see me around, and I will have videos coming soon-ish.
Beautiful. All right, guys, be safe, practice that self-care, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.